Language learning bottlenecks. So this is definitely a video that many beginners need to hear, and it's not a concept you probably would have heard explained to you before. So we'll get straight into it. A bottleneck is the current biggest problem in your language. So if you're a language learner, because this channel is for beginner language learners, your biggest problem might be, for example, not knowing the alphabet, not understanding verb conjugation, lack of vocabulary, etc. If you don't understand any of those things I just said, that's okay. You're probably not at that level where you even need to yet. But basically, any problem you might think of in your language that's kind of your main problem at the moment, that is the bottleneck. And the reason it's called a bottleneck is because, like a bottle, which I have a picture of here, the neck of the bottle basically slows down everything that gets poured into it. So any liquid that gets poured into it is kind of slowed down by the metaphorical bottleneck, because it can't travel as fast as the rest of the bottle would allow. And that's kind of what happens with your language learning. So the highest ROI task, which is return on investment in language learning, is to basically continually figure out what bottleneck you're up to and solve it. So if you're at the beginning of a language, for example, and you don't know the alphabet yet, the highest ROI task would, of course, be learning the alphabet, because it's very hard to progress without knowing the alphabet. Many people would disagree with that, but that's not true. You do need to know the alphabet to properly speak a language. So yeah, and many beginners I've found, and this is still me, to be honest, and probably you if you're watching this, you waste a lot of time not knowing what to spend your time on, as in you kind of have an anxiety about what to spend your time on, because you don't want to invest time into something that's useless. And so here is basically the thing that is the most useful for you to invest your time into, which is solving the bottleneck you're up to. And this video is basically going to explain how to identify bottlenecks, how to solve them, and that kind of thing. Here's what you need to do. So those are the two parts that I just said. If you do like this kind of educational content, definitely consider subscribing. This is the kind of videos I make. But yeah, let's go. So finding your bottleneck is number one. Your current bottleneck will be the thing that gets in your way the most at the moment. So if you're a beginner language learner, you don't need to worry about, for example, pronunciation, like pronunciation of like full sentences and getting all those little things perfect. That's just weird. It's like worrying about polishing a car when you haven't even built the car yet. It's not something that is your chief concern at the moment. Down the track it might be, but there's no point worrying about that at the beginning. So you need to identify what the actual main problem is with the stage that you're at in language learning. So I've got another example here that actually is to do with languages. You don't worry about conjugating verbs into the past tense. That means, saying I ate instead of I eat, or I drank instead of I drink, that kind of thing. You don't worry about that if you can't even read the alphabet yet, because it's too advanced. It's worrying about, it's getting a little bit too big for your boots, in the sense that you don't really need to worry about that yet, because you're not even at that stage. So whatever you think about most at the moment, that is probably the bottleneck. I've found is a good indicator, but that's not always the case. So I'll show you on the next slide. Is it on the next slide? It is. A way of actually knowing exactly where you're up to. But whatever you obsess over at the moment, whether it's like, I know there was points when I was learning Italian, which is the second language I learned, where I struggled with some of the pronouns, because it kind of messed with my head. I struggled with some tenses and that kind of thing. You don't have to worry about not knowing what those words mean. But yeah, there are just things that you obsess about for like a week or maybe even a few months, because you struggle with them or whatever, and that is the bottleneck you're up to, and you're always at some kind of bottleneck. So yeah, the bottleneck also always exists in the language learning process. So if you haven't seen my video on the language learning process, I'd highly recommend you check it out. It's basically the order of how things fall into place for you to actually learn parts of a language. So I'll just walk you through it really quickly. Basically, a language exists that you don't know. You read and listen to stuff and don't understand what it means. You connect a foreign word to a word you know. So for example, if you're learning Italian, you learn that ciao means hello, acqua means water. You connect it to a word you know in your language. You build on that connection by putting it in sentences and understanding more about how you can use that. And then now you can write and speak using those words, and then through practice and mistakes, you solidify this knowledge. That is basically the language learning process. And the bottleneck that you will have will exist somewhere in here. So for example, if you don't know the alphabet, that would be in here, in that you read and listen, but you don't understand. So with the reading component, if you don't know the alphabet, you wouldn't even be able to say the words. So for example, if you take Russian, I'm learning it, but I can't speak it properly yet. I can read the alphabet properly though. So if you put any Russian text in front of me, obviously my pronunciation wouldn't be perfect because I'm not a native speaker, but I could read it to you. And so if I was talking over the phone with an actual Russian, I could read a text. I had no idea what it meant because it was really complicated words. And they would probably be able to tell me, because my pronunciation is good enough that I can read the alphabet and quickly and kind of transcribe that over the phone. And it's the same with languages that use the English alphabet a lot of the time. So for example, Italian, if you read that, because it's in English letters, you don't even need to learn an alphabet, I could probably tell you what it meant, given that the words weren't like too dissimilar in their pronunciation from English. So yeah, that would be an example of where learning the alphabet would be on the language learning process. Another problem might be if your bottleneck is speed of speaking, for example. If you can't talk fast, you stumble over your words too much. That's obviously more of an advanced problem. That problem lies kind of down here because obviously you have knowledge of what all the words mean. If I gave you an hour to rehearse and prepare a sentence in response to something I said to you, so if I said, tell me a bit about where you live, and then I gave you an hour in a room to prepare, you'd be able to say it quickly because you've prepared it. And then if I asked you something else and gave you another hour to prepare, you'd be able to do it, but obviously you just can't do it very quickly. That problem of speed of thinking and speaking would exist here on the language learning process because you're struggling to write and speak even though you have that knowledge. So things like that. I want you to have a look at this language learning process, think about what you're working on, and think about where on this process effectively is the problem that you have, and that will give you a great indicator of how you need to fix that. If it's early on, you need to kind of do more reading and listening. If it's here, you need to do more writing and speaking, etc. If you do have any questions, by the way, please comment them down below and I will respond to them and help you guys. So the second part of this is fixing your bottleneck. Now that you've identified your bottleneck, which I hope you have, it isn't too difficult of a thing to do. Don't overthink it. The highest ROI task, which is return on investment, as I said before. I don't know if I'd define that. Return on investment just means that doing this thing will get you the greatest outcome possible. So if you're researching as a beginner language learner, how can I learn 8 languages simultaneously because you want to be a polyglot? That's obviously not a very high ROI task because it's too advanced and it's not really practical. Whereas if you're a beginner language learner learning Russian, for example, a very high ROI task would be learning the alphabet or potentially reading a little bit about the language or listening to someone talk about it who understands it to kind of get a bit of a grasp of the language. That would be a very high ROI task for a beginner because it's very important for where you're at. So an example of solving a problem is, as I've just put here, you struggle with the alphabet, so you study and revise the alphabet until you can read it smoothly. That's basically what I just said as well. So every problem is different, and I want you to throw your full weight behind the bottleneck and figure out how to effectively beat it. And this goes back to what I said about people worrying about if they're, wasting their time with doing parts of a language. This is the best way to not waste your time with learning a language, doing things that aren't even helping you learn. If you can figure out what your biggest problem is continually, throw your weight behind it, beat it, then get a new biggest problem as you're more advanced, throw your weight behind it, beat it, get a new biggest problem, throw your weight behind it, beat it, you will literally be unstoppable. That is the best possible thing you can do to advance your learning. So yeah, visualize. So to beat the actual bottleneck, here's how I want you to look at it and see it. And this should probably relieve, hopefully it will relieve some anxiety. So basically language learning is just a process. Obviously it's very complicated. You can't express it linearly, but I've tried to. So if you imagine language learning is just a process of events, for example, you learn the alphabet, you learn greetings, blah, 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 all the way through to you have a high competence in speaking it. It's literally just steps in its simplest form. So 1 and 2 here, I put ticks next to. You can imagine they're whatever. Maybe this is learning the alphabet. Maybe this is learning greetings. And you've ticked both of those off, say you've learned both of those. And then number 3, we'll say this is where you're up to. And this, for example, is, learning words like I, you, he, she, pronouns, that kind of thing. And you're struggling with that. That is the current bottleneck because it is quite difficult. Everyone will recommend everything in the language learning space. But in my opinion, it is kind of difficult to move on without knowing those basic pronouns and building blocks instead of just learning random words. I feel like that's kind of irritating. You do need to learn the basic pronouns and stuff. So if that's where you're up to, that is what you need to throw your weight behind to beat it. And then of course you move on to step 4, step 5. The numbers are arbitrary, obviously, until eventually you've reached a high level of competence because you've just destroyed bottleneck after bottleneck after bottleneck. And that's basically how it works. So I know it can be painful when you're obsessing over some kind of problem. Visualize whatever problem you're obsessing over. I guarantee I've had it in some form or another. But what I want you to do is kind of embrace the fact that it's difficult. I want you to let each vicious problem fuel you. So if if you have a really hard time learning, for example, verb conjugation, it sucks to kind of translate it. Maybe you're doing an especially hard language as well. Once you actually master that and find yourself getting good at it, that will like fuel you. Nothing motivates you like progress. So once you've actually found you're getting really good at that and you can do it efficiently, consistently, accurately, that kind of thing, you know you're one step closer in your head. Remind yourself, I've just conquered one step where a lot of people have given up. 99 people have given up on that step, and I have been the one to pass. And if you do that step after step after step, you really are quite rare, and that's what I want you guys to do. So just remember this process. Remember that each bottleneck you crush brings you closer to the end goal, which is this crown here that took me about 5 seconds to make on Canva. So there you go, guys. But the bottom line is basically attacking the biggest challenge is always the highest ROI task of a language learner. Of course, there's many things you can do. There's practicing and all that stuff, but literally just finding whatever is holding you back the most, be it reading quickly, speaking quickly, listening, the alphabet, certain topics like verb conjugation, memorizing vocab, anything like that. Maybe even confidence, like there's mental challenges. I'm actually going to make a video on that soon. But attacking the biggest challenge is always the highest ROI task of a language learner. And I know this is easier said than done, which is definitely why you need to check out my channel. I've got content out already and I'll continue to put content out helping you guys with stuff. And as always, I'm happy to take questions and recommendations for videos in the comments section. But yeah, thank you for listening, guys. I do hope I helped you. Subscribe if you do like this content. It does make me feel better about all the work I put in for free. And if you're interested, we do have a Discord for language learners if you want to join that. It's completely free, obviously. And check out my website as well. I'll have links in the description to both. But yeah, thank you for listening and have a good one.